This is the place, the making of modern Mormon myth. What are the implications if Brigham Young never told Wilford Woodruff this is the place? What about the vision Woodruff mentioned? Had Young seen the Salt Lake Valley years prior? The first thing I want to do is go back in time and examine the record regarding moving west. When did Mormonism's founding fathers first reveal their intentions to settle their flock in the Great Basin? My first stop is Nauvoo, Illinois, August 1842. Joseph Smith declared, "Some of you will live and go and assist in making settlements and build cities and see the saints become a mighty people in the midst of the Rocky Mountains." From that day forward, every Latter-day Saint anxiously awaited the day when they would leave the Midwest and make their home in the Salt Lake Valley, right? Not exactly. As it turns out, Mormonism's founder may not have ever made that statement either. The evidence suggests this specific prophecy is almost certainly a forgery, interpolated into the text of a random journal entry and later published in the documentary History of the Church. Joseph's cousin and apostle George A. Smith was appointed church historian following the death of Willard Richards in 1854, 7 years after the church was established in the Utah Territory. He immediately began taking up the history where Richards had left off, specifically focusing on the last 4 years of Joseph's life. On April 10, 1854, Smith stated, "I had to revise and compare 2 years of back history, filling up numerous spaces which had been marked as omissions on memoranda by Dr. Richards. I commenced compiling the history of Joseph Smith from April 1st, 1840 to his death on June 27, 1844. The text in question was penned by Thomas Bullock, who served as chief scribe on the project under the direction of Smith. The entry, dated Saturday 6, describes a rather mundane account of Joseph making a visit to Montrose, Iowa, to attend to some mason business, an odd place to see a revelation on the destiny of the kingdom of God. Second, the text concerning the Rocky Mountains is in different style handwriting wedged into the bottom margin of the page, obviously a late addition to the record. Finally, if the prophet had been considering moving his congregation west as early as 1842, then there should be more documented evidence of this fact from that time forward. However, not only are historical records eerily silent on the subject of Mormons moving to the Rocky Mountains during their final years in Nauvoo, but in fact, quite the opposite can be found. Another sermon that Joseph Smith supposedly gave was quoted by Wilford Woodruff in General Conference 1898. Here, Smith is reported to have said, "It is only a little handful of priesthood you see here tonight, but this church will fill North and South America. It will fill the world. It will fill the Rocky Mountains. There will be tens of thousands of Latter-day Saints who will be gathered in the Rocky Mountains. This people will go into the Rocky Mountains. They will there build temples to the Most High." The first clue this prophecy is a fraud is Woodruff's mention of tens of thousands. If Smith had prophesied about the future of the church, why describe details applicable only to the period immediately surrounding Woodruff's speech? As of 2017, there were more than 2 million Mormons on record in Utah alone. It would be the equivalent of Gordon B. Hinckley addressing his congregation in the 1990s and claiming Joseph had once prophesied about 1 million Latter-day Saints gathered in Utah. And why only mention the temples built there, meaning the Rocky Mountains, given the roughly 150 temples currently spread across the globe? Once again, this statement applies only to Wilford Woodruff's time, when the church had only 4 temples, all in Utah. From this information, we can surmise that either Joseph Smith's prophetic vision was limited to the 19th century, or Wilford Woodruff invented the prophecy himself. After the murder of Joseph and Hiram Smith, some church leaders were still certain that Nauvoo would remain their home in perpetuity. As late as March 5, 1845, Apostle Heber C. Kimball, then second only to Brigham Young in church authority, made the following statement to the Nauvoo congregation. Some think we shall be driven from Nauvoo, but we are going to stay in Nauvoo, and we shall build it up. Not many years will pass away before there will be more than 150,000 bishops to attend to the temporal affairs of the church. This would indeed be a curious declaration to make if, in fact, church leaders had heard Joseph Smith make multiple prophecies regarding the Rocky Mountains, one of them less than 3 years prior. Even more curious is the mention of more than 150,000 bishops in Nauvoo. If Joseph had prophesied merely tens of thousands of saints settling the Rocky Mountains, why would Heber foresee a need for hundreds of thousands of bishops? In the sparse instances where migrating west or traveling over the Rocky Mountains is discussed during this period, locations are vague at best, and never is Salt Lake Valley or the Great Basin mentioned specifically. Church leaders often spoke of raising an ensign on a mountain peak, reminiscent of Old Testament narratives, but again, no one ever mentions specifically when or where this ensign will be raised. Judging from the context of this early discourse, Rocky Mountains appears to be used simply as a generic term for any or all of the mountainous terrain lying between the Pacific Ocean and the Great Plains of North America, without reference to any specific range. Even when moving to the mountains became a very real probability following expulsion from Nauvoo, the apostles were still considering among their potential destinations California, Oregon, Vancouver Island, and West Texas, all of which are teeming with mountains. Also, in that day, California and Oregon were not limited to their present state boundaries. These territories encompassed roughly the entire western third of the modern continental United States. In 1869, George A. Smith describes a moment in which Brigham Young fasted and prayed on the subject of where to move the saints. At some point in this ordeal, he had a vision of Joseph Smith, who showed him the mountain we now call Ensign Peak, immediately north of Salt Lake City, and there was an ensign fell upon that peak. And Joseph said, "Build under the point where the colors fall, and you will prosper and have peace." The authenticity of this vision, however, is doubtful in view of the fact there is no contemporary record of this event ever taking place. In fact, this sermon by Smith in 1869 is the only known report of the vision. It should be noted that George A. Smith was also the man responsible for revising the historical record, including one of Joseph's Rocky Mountain prophecies. On September 24, 1845, Brigham Young signed a pledge to leaders of the anti-Mormon mob that the church would leave Nauvoo the following spring for an anticipated resettlement in Oregon or on Vancouver Island. Mormon opposition leaders agreed to the terms on October 1st. Less than 3 months later, Young wrote in a letter, "We expect to emigrate west of the mountains next season. If we should eventually settle on Vancouver's Island, according to our calculations, we shall greatly desire to have a mail route. If Oregon should be annexed to the United States and Vancouver's Island incorporated in the same by our promptly paying the national revenue and taxes, we can live in peace with all men." By 1846, as the saints were already on the move, President Young still appeared undecided on the subject. When pressed by his brother as to the final destination of the saints, Young offered the following response: "Brother Lorenzo, when we reach the end of our journey, I shall know it, and I don't know it." Even as late as 1870, Brigham still publicly admitted his uncertainty at the time of the whereabouts of their destination. In a speech given at a July 24th commemoration event, he stated, "5 times I have forsaken all my worldly goods for Christ's sake. Last of all, we had to pull up stakes and pack up whatever we could and leave the state of Illinois for Vancouver's Island or some other place." It was clear in the minds of the Mormon faithful that while stationed at winter quarters, a move west was imminent. But it was still not certain where they were going to finally settle. One has to wonder, when did Brigham Young know that this, specifically the Salt Lake Valley, is the right place?